Welcome to YIMBY Nation, a podcast exploring U.S. housing and the roadblocks to building more equitable neighborhoods. Join Jimmy, Peter, and V as they, and special guests, offer their unique perspectives on building more diverse communities and addressing the social problems that emanate from the lack of decent, safe, and affordable housing. Our hosts have served in the fields of advocacy and nonprofit, public, and private development, and are driven by their passion for community empowerment. Join the conversation and share your thoughts on social using hashtag YIMBYNation.
So Wade, you and I worked together for about 10 years with ACORN, and I thought it would be a good way, just as an overview, to share with the audience a little bit about what ACORN was about, some of the history of ACORN, and particularly in relation to some of the housing campaigns that you undertook.
Oh, that we did as well, as you know, Peter. So ACORN began in 1970. I was with ACORN through until 2008. One of the largest campaigns had to do with housing. We were part of the large coalition that worked to win passage of the Community Reinvestment Act, as well as the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act. Those two federal laws gave us huge tools for at least a minute to try to force big money center banks to push, in our case, billions of dollars into low to moderate income communities to enable homeowners who had been the victim of redlining to be able to access homes. Those two laws passed in 1977 in that area. ACORN filed two of the first three challenges before the Federal Reserve on non-compliance with that act, one against Boatman's Bank in St. Louis, and one against, none of these banks exist anymore, they're all gobbled up, and the other was Hibernia here in New Orleans, where I live, which is part of the Capital One empire, and I can't remember, Boatman's may be part of Bank America, I think as well. But the long and short of it is, in an extensive campaign over a half dozen years, we finally forced many big banks into negotiating direct agreements with us to facilitate the home ownership. By my calculations, somewhat over 6 million homes came through our agreements. And if you looked at all the agreements that were negotiated under CRA, you're talking about a multiple that's at least twice that. If we talked about today, we'd have to wonder if that was the best strategy, because home ownership that we thought was, by the time 2008 and 2007 and the meltdown came in the real estate industry, as subprimes, which had been another target of ours. We tried to stop predatory lending in the subprimes. I mean, I can tell you about one of the worst days of my career was when in Orange County one day, I got to negotiate with 4 different subprimes in one day, boom, 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 and then catch a plane out of Orange County at the John Wayne Airport. But that was, First Century and Option One and AmeriQuest, and I forget the fourth right this second. And then, and New Century was a good example because they were one of the first banks to collapse, first subprimes to collapse in 2007-8, because those were in some ways manufactured loans without broker control. My point, though, is come the meltdown of the Great Recession, much of the gains that we had accomplished and so many others, including y'all, Peter, I know you were involved in this in your career. Many of the ownership gains for non-white families disappeared. We're now almost back to where we were when the act passed, which makes you wonder how you spent your life. Luckily, it wasn't just on housing, but we were drawn into these issues. Some of that was certainly one of the major campaigns for ACORN. Living wages, we ran 100-something campaigns. that distributed billions of dollars worth of wage increases. Every time you read now that the federal minimum wage is stuck, but there are some states, Florida, Ohio, et cetera, Arkansas, that still have a cost of living index that puts them so much higher than the federal minimum. Those all date back to initiative campaigns and elections and agreements we won back in that period. Neighborhood development, I mean, you name it. ACORN, at the point I left in 2008, had almost 500,000 members working out of 100 different locations, offices, and even more cities than that. So for those, I mean, the years go by and there's a whole new generation of organizers that has, what was that ACORN? But in its day, what it is now is somewhat different because we work not only in a small way in the US, but globally in about 15 countries. But your question, Peter, that's how we spent a lot of time over the 38 years I was there and the 40 years of ACORN's history.
Right. And just to follow up, then there were the squatting campaigns in New York and Philadelphia that also led to the creation of ACORN Housing Corporation in multiple cities, which was directly dealing with affordable housing development in those areas.
Exactly. I just sort of, glazed over that in that 6 or 7 year period between when the act passed and when we started winning those agreements.
Right.
But the loan counseling operation was a huge program run by Brewster Palin, a comrade of Peter's and mine for many, many years, who still does this work. We had that operation was in 34 of the 100 cities we were in, and then actual development, which was a more difficult process for us, was only in about 6 to 8 cities. The most outstanding operations were in the Phoenix area, and of course, Mutual Housing of New York, Manny, which still continues to manage and operate with thousands of units in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area, which came out of that process directly from squatting. That was Mayor Koch was the mayor, and once we beat him, he was glad to make an agreement, but it could not have ACORN in its name. So we created Manny, and the A was something else, but it wasn't ACORN. So
association.
Yeah, let the good times roll. Let the good times roll. I mean, it's we had a lawyer once that said if it squeaks like a pig and eats like a pig, then it's really not a horse. Well, in this case, it was everything but ACORN, but we didn't have the name there. And
we had ACORN board members certainly populated that board.
Oh, they controlled it completely. That's what you mean by populated it. Yeah, I mean, so it wasn't. We didn't call it that, and that's the way, so there's a very detailed history.
And as you're talking, when I'm going to go back to you mentioning about the subprime period in 2007, 2008, helping on homeowners gain access to counseling and consulting. ACORN did a really great thing for this country. I was going to ask you the question, but I think I know what the answer is. What led you to begin organizing in other countries around the world? But as you've been talking, I think I know why. But can you shed some light on that for our viewers?
Absolutely, V. I mean, we followed our membership. That's how we got into many of these issues. People would come to us with particular problems that turned out not to be problems for them individually, but community issues, and not community issues just in North Philly or, Oakland or whatever, but issues all around the country. And we also followed our members as we had more and more success in the last decade or so of ACORN's work. Our members were from all over the world, but they were particularly from Dominican Republic, from Mexico, obviously. We had neighbors from Canada. So the first organization that we assisted in building was in Peru, and this actually was right through the housing. The terrible period under President Fujimori, which had to do with the Shining Path, led many people in that repression to exile themselves in the U.S. So we had members. There's a significant Peruvian populations in the Los Angeles area and the New Jersey area, including they were members of our board. And in our loan counseling program, as part of ACORN Loan Counseling, we had a number of loan counselors, including senior management. So once it looked like the government was finally going to change and Toledo was elected president, they pushed us, well, is there any way you could help in the rebuilding of society through, because we've had this experience with ACORN, and that was the same thing in Dominican Republic and Mexico. Can we bring this back to our home communities? And we have a problem saying no in ACORN. We still have that problem. If somebody really wants to organize, we don't know how to say, I don't think so. I mean, so and there we were, I can remember meeting with the First Lady of Peru at her chief of staff at midnight because the government still was in transition. They had to come in after their other jobs to run but it ended up that we've been working in Peru almost 20 years, in Canada almost 18 years, and so forth and so on. And many of their issues are the same as what we dealt with in the US, but different in the sense that they're more about survival. We organize our second largest country is India, where we're particularly in this period of the pandemic, we've been organizing everything from food distribution to trying to get housing and protect people's livelihoods we organize mainly informal workers in India. So we have about 60,000 members there. It's every country is different, as we always say.
Can you define when you say members? Are they all, let's say, individuals, non-for-profits, government? What comprise of members?
The best way the best way for us to describe it is that ACORN is like a union in the community. So these are all people who pay membership dues at various levels. So it's a family membership. So it matters not to us whether it's 2 people or 20 that's in the family. They join as a member and become active in their, whatever that group is, workplace or community or housing complex or whatever it might be. And then they take action on issues and campaigns that most affect them.
Okay.
But we're a membership organization. We still bridle when internationally people say, well, is ACORN an NGO? No, we're not an NGO. We are a nonprofit everywhere, but we are a membership organization, and that's the best way to understand us.
And the membership have a common interest, and that common interest is essentially to do good, be a good neighbor.
But also to embolden our local membership to lead and fight in their communities. I mean, we obviously train and develop organizers out of those communities. ACORN International, up until literally less than 3 months ago, had no paid staff in the US. It's all of our organizers are native to their countries, whether it's Korogochu, the mega slum in Nairobi, or Dharavi in India, or San Juan Laurgancho in Lima. I mean, they all come from those areas, and they assist leadership development, and they help people come up with campaigns and strategies to fight for change.
That's great. I just want to touch base on my last question, but I do have some more questions for you about the countries that you're in, especially Africa and Canada. But before then, can you share some of the housing issues that ACORN International members have taken, and where these campaigns are happening, and what kind of successes are you seeing?
These days, the organization, I mean, people can't afford to buy houses anymore. So our organization, particularly in some of our newer organizations like France and Ireland, Scotland, England, are really tenants unions more than they are anything else, because the issues for tenants in areas, particularly like the United Kingdom, where there used to be a lot of social housing, which is what they call public housing, what we would call public housing, as Thatcher sort of reduce that and the neoliberalist sort of privatization programs that are so common around the world, private sector tenants, who are now the majority in the UK and many other areas, had as few rights as we have in the US. So if you were in social housing, you had some rights, but if you were out there with a private landlord, small or large, you had virtually none. So security of tenure, which is what we would call a lease here, was an issue. Any kind of inspections or, warrants of habitability were often an issue. So it's been a lot of individual tenant eviction defense. It's been a lot of campaigning for standards of conduct and housing. Every country, once again, is different. So in Scotland, we're able to win a lot because of devolution. The Scottish Parliament has been very accommodating to the program of our organization in terms of creating even forms of rent control and zoning programs. But in England, everything is decided by the Parliament. So it'd be like us having to go to Congress to try to get anything at a city level in New York City or in New Orleans or anywhere else. And so that's forced us to expand dramatically. We have almost 30 chapters, branches as they're called in the UK, in England alone now, because we have to build enough density to be able to push Westminster. So tenant issues have been the most important housing issues. And in places like during the pandemic, whether it was Kenya or India or whatever, it's been stopping evictions. Because where we aren't organizing tenants, we're often organizing populations that are landless, that are in informal communities that may be paying rent. But Kenya is a good example. They're paying rent in Korogochu, but no one technically owns the property, but they're paying a landlord, even though the property itself is owned by the Kenyan government. So these are difficult situations depending on the country.
Thank you.
There's so much that I could ask you. So let me see if I can get my thoughts organized. I grew up during the 60s, and a lot of progress was made since then. But it feels to me like you said earlier when you were talking, that we're starting to go backwards, starting to regress in a lot of social issues, housing, personal rights, civil rights. Am I just feeling that way because of social media and 24/7 television? Are things really starting to regress? Things really starting to get worse? Do we really need to be concerned about our civil liberties and things like that?
Jimmy, I don't want to sound like Debbie Downer here, but I'm afraid I should say that even before I started ACORN, I was an organizer for the National Welfare Rights Organization. I started in Springfield, Massachusetts, and was the head organizer of Massachusetts Welfare Rights Organization, which was the largest of the affiliates of NWRO. If I looked at the situation for welfare recipients in 1969, when I started organizing them, compared to now, it's a devastation. The numbers are down, the work requirements are such that in many cases, people who are eligible don't even bother to apply because it's so impossible to access the benefits in many states. I'm encouraged, I was encouraged at least by some of the proposals the Biden administration had made to sort of reverse some of those changes. But in many areas, public housing, welfare programs, we've gone in some ways backwards. I mean, we may have thought Richard Nixon was a huge, relatively speaking, seems like a liberal compared to Bill Clinton on welfare. I still have to have nightmares about whether or not we should have accepted the family assistance program of Monahan and Nixon, because at least we would have had, $1,500 a year to start with to build up from there. I mean, I read some of these articles every day in the Times or the Post or the Wall Street Journal about, whether or not the best political strategy is to start small and hope you can, put more air in that tire so it runs faster later on. I hate to tell you, but back then I was, I was charged with organizing the all or nothing program. I mean, we thought we had an opportunity. You go, you sit in at HEW's office. There isn't even an HEW anymore, but you try to get the best benefits for recipients. Now I have to, sometimes think about whether or not we made a mistake not taking the best deal on the table then, so that we could have had a floor that was so much higher now. So I'm not, like I said, I don't, every day I go to work. So, I've always said you have to keep one eye in the clouds and the other right there in the dirt in front of you. And so that's, I think, the contradiction of our work. But our generation has not necessarily seen a steady line of progress since the 60s.
So we seen the gap, the wealth gap, poverty gap, however you want to define it. I guess depends on which side you're looking from, right? It's gotten obviously worse. But there doesn't seem to be the activism that you know about and that I'm aware of. That type of activism doesn't seem to be prevalent anymore. We have a lot of activists, but that seems to be desperate, seems to be spread out over a lot of different issues. There doesn't seem to be any concentrated activism about the underlying causes of poverty and those things. We rarely even talk about them anymore. We talk about things like the middle class and middle class tax cuts, all these buzzwords, but we are afraid to say poverty. We're afraid to say these things. We don't even address them. We don't talk about them. Everything is cleaned up. There's a middle tax cut. There can't be a low income tax cut. How do we get out of this morass? I mean, I'm feeling despair. I need some hope. I mean, I'm almost 70 years old. I mean, what are we going to do if more and more people become poor? I don't know. I've been doing this almost as long as you have for the last 45, almost 50 years. It seems like the work I've been doing has been all for nothing.
I'm glad I'm not your guidance counselor, Jimmy, because I'd have trouble putting sugar in your coffee. I mean, I don't want to sound like, some old man here talking about, hey, young people today don't really do the same. I mean, I'm encouraged by the level of activism. I think the bridge to cross currently is a recognition of how hard the work is and how long you have to commit to do it. I find myself perplexed by this notion some activists have of building a brand for themselves. I mean, Peter and I know full well, I mean, our notion of organizing was leaders in a right behind them, organizers, way in the back somewhere, and if you could find them at all. It was almost embarrassing if you ended up, with a quote in the paper. Now, organizers, self-proclaimed, seem to spend a lot of time making sure their name is in the paper, making sure they are the lead, sort of the band leader of that parade. I mean, that is a curious phenomena that I think is going to make it difficult to build long-term organization. There's a lot more commitment to mobilization now than there is to organization. I mean, Peter and I can talk about our pride at the accomplishments of ACORN, but I'm pretty honest. I mean, that took, 40 years. I mean, the first 10 years we won things, but we weren't winning, ownership to 6 million houses. That took one block built on top of another. And I think in some cases, I'm concerned that the tradition I came from, and Jimmy, I think it's probably somewhat the similar tradition you came from, was you took this work as a mission. It was a permanent commitment. It was like Baptist ministers. They don't retire, they die, at the pulpit. Well, we weren't ministers, but that tradition was you go to work every day, you put your shoulder to the wheel, you get knocked down, you stand back up. I mean, but it wasn't sort of like, I'll try this for a couple of years and then I'll try that and I'll see, if I can go to work for a foundation. I mean, so I think, but what we about Jimmy, so because I can't be too negative here, I wouldn't be able to go to work again tomorrow, is that in the rest of the world, and to some degree, I'm hopeful about the United States, there's a recognition that some things that people have been trying aren't working, and that you have to try to go old school. You have to try to get back on the doors. You have to try to actually be in the neighborhoods and put leaders first and build. And that's what we've seen that's so exciting about, say, the growth of our organization in places like France and the UK, is that people have started doing that work. And even in the pandemic, we were able in the UK to grow by 2.5 times. We now have 6,000 people paying dues there. I mean, because when there's a crisis, a real organization with real members, we saw that in Katrina with ACORN. We're seeing it now in the pandemic in a number of places where we're organizing, where growth has just spurted, because that was a place there were real people doing real work, standing with the poor, as you would say, or with people to make sure they won what they had to have to survive. And you come out of those kinds of crises stronger. And I think in some cases, we'll see a generation of organizers, I hope, that makes long-term commitment to do the work. Every once in a blue moon, I have people reach out to me and say they want to try. So I hope, Jimmy.
Curious, I know that your mission is focused on working more with the membership. Have you ever considered development, right? Let's say housing. So you can't resolve the tenant issues because of all of these obstacles. Then maybe you'll go and you'll develop the housing, and then you will control the factor, and you will make sure that it works and the tenants are taken care of, and all the issues that they have, you have that control over it. Have you done it? Have you thought about it?
We have thought about it, and we have done a lot of it. It's just the problem is with development, and I'll stand second to Peter and the rest of you on this, is we haven't been able to get it to scale. I mean, we had problems defending our development programs in ACORN because on one side we had our loan counseling program that was putting 50,000 people into home ownership a year directly out of that program. On the other hand, we had our development program where it could be 100 years before we built 50,000 houses.
Yeah.
And that, I don't need to tell, I mean, Peter could write chapter and verse that I don't know about how to raise money from the state and the federal, and how to, get soft seconds and all this sort of crazy language that has to do with housing finance that is also a lost art. But we just couldn't figure out how to do it at scale. And sometimes you have to decide what you're good at and what you're not as good at. So we don't, piss on people doing development. It's important, but it wasn't something that we understood as a fundamental strategy for change.
I often, Jimmy and Peter, we talked about this before. Let's pick on Jimmy first. Although Peter, you and Jimmy are in the same boat on this one, but Jimmy, you have developed more than $6 billion worth of affordable housing. You have. That is a huge, significant number. Now, I can't help but wonder, and I'm also a developer, so we said before, we should make sure what we say so we don't put ourselves out of our business. But when we do, let's say, affordable housing, that budget is not only supposed to cover pre-development, construction, but also supportive services. I can't help but wonder on a $50 million budget for development, 20 million of that is actually going to, let's say, construction hard cost. And then the other 30 million is a combination of supportive services and the pre-development and the consultants. Have you seen, going back to what Wade was saying, taking some of that whole development money and supporting an effort of what we talked about, the welfare rights, where we were now, where we are now, what can we do in terms of that? Because we are developers, but we also care about the people. And where do we bridge the gap? So maybe this is something that is for all of us to figure out how. I didn't really have any question. I just wanted to make that point.
Well, thank God you're not asking me. And I thought that you were putting the knife into Jimmy there, and he's already said, and I didn't know what Jimmy's background was, but if he's done $6 billion worth of affordable housing and he's depressed, oh my God, I feel exactly that.
Not million,
exactly
billion.
That same way. It's
the scale.
It's important to fight every day, and it's important to do what we've done. There's no question about that. But you do have to say, did we really change the world in the way we hope to change it? And I'm not sure.
It's the scale. When I was in New York City in the late, 90s, we were looking at this, I think it was the 75th anniversary or something, maybe the 50th anniversary of New York City housing. And then I was looking at housing built 47, 48, 49, and 50. And it was like 50, 60,000 units of housing that were built in like this 5 or 6 year period. And I was just blown away by the mega development. Now there was some downside of that. There was no environmental laws, and there was displacement, right, urban removal, and the housing they built. We all know the outcome of the high rises and what happened with that. But the sheer magnitude of what they did, and then Peter and I did this, and it takes us 3 years to do, what was it, 101 units of housing in
per phase, yeah.
Side. Yeah. And so people pat you on the back. I don't want to be patted on the back. That was nothing. I apologize. I mean, it was 101 units we did, and then we did another 101 units, Peter and I. So Peter, and we built a whole community, but the whole community is 220 units of housing, and there's 500 units of housing. But I've been working on that 500 units of housing since 2000 and what, Peter, 9 or 10?
Yeah, 2009.
So, and I look back and I see 50,000 units of housing. New York City has 180,000 units of housing, but about a third of that was built in the post-war period, right between 47 and 50 something. That's the scale we're talking about. So, people say, wow, wow, wow. I'm not enamored by it. I'm glad I was able to do it, but it's just the sheer numbers of housing that we need, the sheer order of magnitude, the sheer scale that we need to really make a dent. We don't talk about that. We're talking about the couple of $1 trillion, and then we fight over that in Congress. But we need hundreds of thousands of units of housing in Connecticut alone to close that gap. Yeah. People who are paying more than 50% of their income for rent, people who are living in housing that's not safe, decent, and affordable. So yeah, I think I'm not pessimistic. I'm just hoping that we can find some way for everyone to understand that what we're doing here, the magnitude of what we're doing here, is just not enough. The magnitude needs to be tenfold. We it takes us forever to do it. 50 units of housing, 100 units of housing. We have all these different groups doing it, but the scale is just not enough.
Yeah, and let me just add to that. I spent 5 years in Brooklyn working in East New York with John Kest and Fran Streich, who built the ACORN organization that mobilized to the squatting campaigns that enabled this housing organization to come out of it. And, in 5 years, we made a dent in the 180 units of housing that were transferred by the Koch administration to this mutual housing association, and had another 200 units negotiated by the time I left. But, that was almost unnoticeable in that community. The scale of need was so great. And it just seems like we've lost in this country, lost touch with the social contract that came out of the FDR administration, say, that led to those 50,000 units of housing that you cite in New York, Jimmy. I mean, there were commitments then to, I think, a different kind of vision of equity in this country than exists today. And that's where I see, ACORN coming in. It's not, I think the value is not so much in, generating units of affordable housing. It's in creating institutional change so that much larger things can come out of those institutions that can deliver them. And yet we're just one small part of what those institutions are.
Well, and to tell you the truth, it's why we focus so much now on the issues of tenants, because we don't feel like we have a plan, Jimmy and Peter and V, to how to blow this up big enough. Then we're forced to, well, how do we make improvements where people are? So we're going to have to fight where people are to keep the housing affordable and make it more habitable. So that's been, we're in a big campaign. We just won in the European Union, as you may or may not know, they classify housing according to a letter scale in terms of what shape the housing is in. So in the F and G, the lower category, we just won a commitment in France through the Assembly to retrofit all the last two categories of housing by 2025. Well, what that will do is, whether you call it retrofitting or weatherization or whatever, it will make that housing more climate friendly, but also make it secure for people. It'll upgrade the housing, change the windows, doors. I mean, it's essentially a small time but big impact remodeling campaign on a lot of housing for tenants throughout France. We're trying now, we're going to do an action here at COP26 in Glasgow here in 2 weeks, well, 10, 11 days now, because we're trying to see if we can expand this kind of retrofit campaign in Europe and in the UK. And we've looked at it in Canada as well. So that's where we're going, is how to fix what's broken that we've got, because we just don't know. I mean, I read all the articles, about new schemes to do mass housing, whether it's worker housing or, zoning, but I just don't see how to hit the numbers any other way than, so we're trying what we're trying. And if anybody comes up with a solution, Jimmy or V or Peter,
A solution.
hit me. I'm ready. We'll move in a dime to do that.
Although I'm not sure how that works here, but I can see that I'm not sure because you're primarily outside of the United States. But I was going to say a perfect solution is, as Jimmy and Peter and they have been able to figure out how to develop in the economies of scale. But as they do their development, you partner right alongside with them and make sure that the tenants, the welfare of the tenants are being taken care of. So there's no need to form a separate organization, but rather working hand together.
Sounds good, but that's also exactly how Manny worked. There were people, we didn't only, make the houses owned in common with the common space or whatever, but people were, part of their monthly payments was their membership dues. They had an organization. We staffed that organization.
They put sweat equity into rehabilitating the houses that they were in?
Absolutely. It was a very encouraging program, and New York's laws encourage that because the city was willing to put money into that in a way that a lot of people aren't. We've been building the ACORN Tenants Union in Atlanta over the last 10 months or so, and it's amazing. I mean, huge complexes, 200 units here, 300 units here, 400 units owned by this one, that one, the other. Maintenance, security, all the basic bread and butter issues. I mean, there's mold. I mean, it's like, and, you know, in New York and Connecticut, probably there are certain rights that tenants have. But once you get down where I live in the United States, I'm not saying it's India, but it's not pretty. What right people have, and they have to organize in and demand better. But there are risks. But yeah, I'm for you, V. Anytime. We'd be glad to do it. But I do read, you know, one of the craziest ideas I ever had in the 70s was when they were starting to build all these condos. Oh, they were going to have condo associations. Well, we know how to work in service organizations. We should figure out a way to train and help do development on condo associations. Now I watch what happened in Miami, and oh my God, I'm glad that one died on the drawing board, because we could be sitting there saying, "Oh my Lord," because I know how hard it was in Manny to get people to agree to fix the furnace, you know. And New York is cold; it's not New Orleans, for God's sakes. But you know, a furnace is serious business, and you have to all of a sudden repair it, and people come up out of their pocket and do it. And so I read those the horror of Miami with a very personal level, like missed one bullet.
Those that bullets.
Yeah. So be careful what you're arguing for, V, because a lot of us it could go either way. But anyway, on we go.
I don't even know if Steve Bachman could have covered your ass on that one.
Absolutely not. He would have left me swinging in the wind. I mean, he would have who? Wade who? That would have been the answer there. Wade who? I don't know this guy.
That was our in-house counsel.
Yeah.
You've been, I mean, some of the countries that I saw that you were in, Africa, South America, Canada, United Kingdom, France. You've been around the world, like literally, which is, first of all, amazing. What is maybe the top 3 common things that you see working collectively with these countries that you think, this is like really working for all of these countries? Maybe we can package that and figure out how to scale it.
Well, we're still looking, V. If we could find, you know, some secret sauce. I mean, I used to joke in ACORN staff meetings, and I still do, same joke, is that if we ever figured out a way to deal with timely garbage pickup, loose dogs, and bad drainage, we could organize the world. And those 3 issues are common everywhere. I mean, developed countries, undeveloped, you know, process of developing countries. But what's interesting about doing the work internationally is how different the laws, country, and resources are. I mean, people are about the same in the sense that they want to live in a better situation. They want to deal with their issues, but the obstacles that are put in front of people are always different. You know, it's challenging to come up with, obviously, livelihood campaigns are always important. That may mean trying to win a living wage in, cities around Vancouver, but it actually means being able to still have a daily wage if you're a hawker or a street vendor, and have a right to livelihood passed by Parliament in India. Organizing informal workers has been a lot of what we do now. And Johnny talks about marginalized communities. That's who lives in these communities around many parts of the world. But now, even in developed countries, US, France, the UK, we're building a whole class of informal workers, gig workers, Uber Eats drivers, Deliveroo, I mean, it's just people who don't have, standard benefits, Social Security or anything else. And that's now seen, even in our country of the United States, seen as a real viable business model that people should, make worth trillions of dollars. I mean, it's like, so we found the common themes, but we haven't found a way to sort of say, okay, if we win this here, the biggest we found is landlord licensing, if you will, trying, but regardless of the country, how to create a regulatory scheme that forces landlords with real penalties and teeth in it to have to provide habitable housing for people who are their tenants. And so we won. It took us 12 years to win that in Toronto. We're now in the process of running the same campaign in Hamilton and Ottawa and other places. Same campaign in Bristol and Edinburgh and Lyon, France, and whatever. So in that sense, as well as in Nairobi at another level, but there we're finding some commonality, but the bells and whistles are still going to be a little different.
Well,
I wish it were the same, but it does make it interesting. Let's say it that way. It keeps you thinking hard.
Yeah, that's.
But I interrupted Peter.
Well, that's okay. I was just going to say we do all have some time constraints here. I would enjoy continuing this conversation for another couple of hours. So maybe we'll have to schedule another podcast at some point to pick up. I have a host of questions and things I'd like to hear about operationally in terms of how you manage an international organization. How do you, with ACORN in, 27, 33, however many states at different points in time, it was a challenge to get organizers together and leaders together for conventions and organizers for training. I can't even imagine how you handle recruitment and training of organizers across all these time zones and languages and have something that's a fairly consistent model for, if you've got an organizer in Nairobi versus in Scotland, they have the same fundamental sort of values and understanding of how to go about bringing people together and moving an organization forward. I don't know, how do you even begin to do that? And again, I know we don't have a lot of time.
Well, here's a quick answer. I mean, ACORN was one centralized, coordinated organization in the United States. ACORN International is a federation, which means, in fact, because each affiliate works into the laws of their country differently and is registered separately as a nonprofit in each country, ACORN basically supports all those organizations, but each one is more different than the same. I mean, Zoom has been helpful, but we're having on the 9th to 11th of November, an hour outside of Paris, we're having the first meeting of our organizing staff internationally since 2019. Wow. So, I mean, I'm getting ready on Monday to take my first trip out of the country since February of last year, when all of a sudden the world stopped. Well, right. That makes it harder. I mean, organizing, Zoom is a great communication tool, but is a terrible organizing tool. I mean, you can't get, if you're trying to have an organizing committee, and we tried it in Atlanta of our tenants union, try to have a Zoom organizing committee. Your kids are running around in the background. I mean, people don't know.
Dogs are barking.
Yeah, if we're lucky, dogs are barking. The phone's ringing. It's a hot. And then getting people to then say they're willing to take action together. They don't know the people. They're looking at a bunch of faces that they may be good looking or not, but that doesn't put 30 people in front of a manager of a tenant complex in Atlanta to say, I don't want mold and I want better maintenance. So it's been a struggle. So we're ready for we made the most out of the pandemic, but we're ready for it to end, because that is, it's a hard problem for us to get anything that's close to what we need in terms of commonality, in terms of methodology and strategy and tactics. But, you know, Skype and email makes some things possible, relatively cheap plane fares. I mean, if we were trying to do ACORN International 40 years ago, forget about it. I mean, you wouldn't be able, I mean, but it's still not easy. And particularly if you can't travel. I mean, now that I'm going back on the road, God knows what I might find in Nairobi when I get back there. Ever since Modi became the prime minister in India, they've refused to renew my 10-year visa. So for the last 3 years, I can't go visit our Indian offices because they've been on a war against nonprofits. So we're doing great work, but I have to meet them in Kathmandu. I have to meet them. I'm getting ready to meet them next spring in Sri Lanka. I mean, they're different challenges, Peter. It may all sound exotic and romantic, but let me tell you, it sucks.
Well, exotic, not so much romantic.
Yeah, really.
How can our listeners help? You know, we've done the stacks, and our listeners are not just in the United States, but all around the world. What can they do to help ACORN?
I also run some radio stations that we built over the years, and some new ones that we got in New Orleans. And every Friday, I do this 30-minute interview show. And I say, okay, 10 minutes and 20 minutes. I'm going to remind people we're talking to you. I do the standard. And then the last 2 minutes is time for you to do sales and promotion. So if you have a website and want to try to get donations, you got an email, get your ass in gear those last 2 minutes. So all of a sudden you're saying to me what I said, hey, that's what people do. Let me tell you, chief organizer at acorninternational.org. That gets to me, or keep it simple, Wade at chieforganizer.org. Remember, I before E when you get to chief. Don't go messing that chief up. I mean, that's key here. If you want to continue the conversation with me, ask questions, have suggestions on any of the problems Peter, and Jimmy and I have brought up, and you've got the clue, don't keep it under a bushel basket. Get on out there and let us know. And if you want to go on the ACORN International website, www.acorninternational.org, there's like more than one donate button on there. PayPal, donate, giving, whatever. Send us some love. Send us some love. Help some of these poor organizers. You know. So glad. And this was fun. If y'all want to do it again, Peter knows how to reach me. In fact, all of you do. And next time I'll look and see more about what y'all are doing. So now that I know your names, I was copying them down. I'll try to be more to the point and do my research, but this was fun.
This was
Wade,
fun.
you've been a great guest. We really appreciate you taking the time with us.
Good luck to you,
so
Peter.
much.
It's been years. You're still looking good.
I appreciate it. So are you. You know, has anybody
Only
ever
from
told
the
you?
neck up. Only from the neck up.
I'm keeping it right there, you know.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Anybody ever told you you've got a resemblance with Tom Petty?
Oh, that's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what was the guy who did, he was I always forget his name. I have a great story that happened to me in León, Mexico at a bullfight, where the guy who was like the U.S. Marshal, Texas Marshal or something, that TV show, he was, you know, one
the
of those
karate guy?
Yeah. What was his name? Chuck
Norris? No, the other guy I know you're talking about.
Not Chuck Norris.
Yeah, Chuck Norris.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, I used to have red hair. You know, my daughter reminds me, you don't have red hair anymore. Don't tell people look for you in the airport, you know, 6 feet tall with red hair. They'll never find you, Dad. That's what you need your daughters for, V. Just to remind you. But this was about 20 years ago, and we're having a meeting of organizers from Mexico and the U.S. and various kinds of organizations. I was there for ACORN and our union, and it was the first meeting. But there were some other union folks there, and they knew there was a bullfight. And hey, you want to come with us? We're going to go over there, 4 or 5 of us. They were from the International Longshoremen Workers Union. We get there late because we couldn't leave the meeting early. You know, we started to get some of the things. And I don't want to talk about animal protection here. I apologize for it, but that was a thing and I wanted to see it. So we walk in and all of a sudden there are these chants in Spanish as we go up to our chairs. And my Spanish is very rudimentary. And they were chanting, "Welcome, Chuck. Welcome, Chuck. Bienvenidos, Chuck. And all of a sudden we sit down, two guys offer me a beer. So no, I didn't think I looked like Chuck Norris, but I had my moment. Leon, Mexico. I could have been, we were somebody.
That was nice.
Okay, over and out.
Good.
All
Thank
right,
you so
thanks
much.
again.
Thank you for joining YIMBY Nation.
Oh, my pleasure.
We're honored.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us and listening to today's episode of YIMBY Nation. Continue the conversation in your communities and on social using #YIMBY Nation. Connect with V at www.vaseconstruction.com. Connect with Jimmy at www.sincereconsulting.com. And connect with Peter by searching Collaborative Development Consulting on LinkedIn.com. Please leave us a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform so we can continue helping communities thrive. Email us at contact@yimbynation.com or visit the podcast website at www.yimbynation.com. Until next time.